I'm so excited to be your moderator for this morning's first ever virtual legislative Cracker Barrel session. We're so excited to be able to be here today and to have all of our representatives, senators from around the Wabash Valley to answer your questions today. Obviously, these are very different times, but it's amazing to see democracy still in action here at the Vigo County Public Library. So here's how it's going to work today. It's going to be a little different than it normally is, but we're still going to be able to hear from you, the public. We're going to ask that you submit your questions. We'll get to that a little bit later. But first and foremost on the list of things for the agenda today, we would like to introduce our legislators, and we would like to have them go around and kind of talk about who they are, what they've been working on, some things that they would like to make reference or to highlight at this time. And so we're asking that each legislator take about 2 minutes or so to talk about the things that they'd like to talk about on their platform. So we kind of have a Brady Bunch situation going on here. So I am going to start to my left. I don't know if you have the same screen that I do, but to my left is Representative Bruce Borders. So take it away.
Can you hear me okay?
Hear you great, yes.
Okay, great. Just unmuted myself. Bruce Borders from Jasonville, and it's going to be a bit of a different year. We're actually, the House of Representatives is actually meeting over in the Government Center South in some conference rooms where they've opened them up, and ultimately for social distancing and so forth. So it's working out okay. As we're doing a lot of things differently this year, but I've got several bills in, but quite frankly, the 800-pound gorilla's in the room this year. The things that we have to do constitutionally is we will be passing a balanced budget this year, and it'll be a little tougher than normal just because of the slowdown of society and the economy with the COVID-19 circumstances. We are bringing in less revenue. Our numbers are coming in a little better than what we anticipated, so it's still doable for sure. But we, you know, again, we do have the budget issue to deal with, and then the other thing is drawing legislative maps as well, or the redistricting is the other constitutional thing that we have to deal with this year. I know both the House and the Senate are hoping to deal with less bills than we normally would see, which is probably better off for the taxpayer anyhow. But anyhow, that's those are the two big issues. Again, drawing the legislative maps and passing a balanced budget, and we should, with the Lord's help, make it through those just fine.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Borders. Glad to hear from you, glad to see you. And coming up next, we have Representative Bob Heaton. So again, Representative Heaton, if you could take a couple minutes and just talk about yourself and your platform.
Okay, thank you, Ron Trail, and thank you everybody out there in Zoom land. Yeah, it's as Representative Borders touched on, a lot of changes and a lot of things we're dealing with here, but our session started this past Monday, and then also we had a committee hearing in Ways and Means on Wednesday, I believe it was. But we dealt with House Bill 1003, and that deals with bringing the funding back up for K through 12 funding, dealing with the virtual classes versus, you know, there was some discussion on that as far as this past summer with Speaker Houston and Senate Pro Tem Rod Bray and working with the governor's office to bring that back up. And so that funding went through. It passed out of committee 24-0, and it's going to go to the floor next week, and it's on this fast track to get through through our House and over to the Senate. So that's gonna happen pretty quick. And also, as Representative Borders said, we as a state wasn't as bad as it could have been. I think I was on a Zoom meeting yesterday for a couple hours, and it looks like our numbers we're only down about 290 million overall. And I think at one time, several months ago, we were thinking, well, we could be as take a big hit, maybe into the 600-700 million range. But anyway, and that's a credit to Hoosiers, and we got right back at it and really helped the economy come back. So that's a great thing. I have a few more bills that I'm going to be filing next week. The deadline on filing the bills is next Thursday. So. But anyway, it's going to be a trying time, but we'll just have to grind it out and get through it, and we'll see what happens in the days and weeks to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Heaton. Before we get to Representative Path, I just want to make mention that our very, very brilliant web team here, they're also posting contact information in the chat for each of our legislators. So at any time, if you want to get their information, their number, their email, just go to the chat. It's right there. So, all right, Representative Tanya Path. Go ahead and talk for about 2 minutes about what's going on.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. What a pleasure it is to be able to do this via Zoom. So I am working on, well, first of all, I represent basically most of Terre Haute, West Terre Haute, and Sealyville. And my committees this year have changed a bit. So I'm on Ways and Means, which determines the budget. I'm on there with Representative Heaton over there. And then also I'm on Education, and then I'm on Elections. So what I personally am working on is I would really like to eliminate the no excuse absentee voting where you have to check a box. I think that we proved in June that there was no fraud, and the state of Indiana allowed us to do it, and it was very successful in my mind, and so I'd like to eliminate that. Also, I still continue to push for the polls to be open later on Election Day. And then I also and working with DNR, I'd really like to offer a COVID special of hunting and fishing licenses. Just a lifetime for 6 months, make some revenue for DNR. Don't know where that'll go, but as my two previous representatives have said, it's gonna be a strange and kind of awkward session. I know we used to go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday for session, and right now probably throughout January on Thursdays. So the amount of bills that will be heard and seen drastically reduced. For example, in education, we used to meet 4 or 5 hours straight, and now all committee meetings have to be 2 hours. So it's going to be a lot less to talk about. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I guess it depends on your point of view. So thanks for having me.
All right, well, thank you so much, Representative Path. And now to our lone senator here today. We're so glad to hear from Senator John Ford. So take a couple minutes and just talk about what's going on with you.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here today. So as they said, we all started session this week on the Senate side. We are trying to hold committees as we normally do. We don't have a 2-hour limit on our committees. There'll be less bills, but we're meeting, luckily we're able to meet in our chambers and not having to go to another facility. So, but our seat assignments have changed. So I'm now up in the balcony instead of down on the floor, but I volunteered for that. I'm not sure it was the smartest decision in the world, but I'm in the balcony either way. But I do, I guess I should back up. I do represent Senate District 38, which is all of Vigo County and the northern half of Clay County. This year, I'm on the Senate Appropriations Committee, which which will work on the budget, on public policy, and I'm on ranking member on Child and Family Services and chair of the Senate Elections Committee. Legislation I'm working on this year, as always, most of it deals with family and children. So I've got a teen suicide bill that would require schools that have student IDs to put the teen suicide hotline on the back of the ID, along with the human trafficking hotline. Working on Tanf, once again, you probably heard me talk about this for a few years, but that's the temporary assistance of needy families, trying to increase participation in that program, because this is a prime example of where we let the executive branch kind of run amok. So the federal government puts into that program for the state of Indiana $210 million. We spend less than 10% on this program, and the administration pulls that money and puts it in other places without even consulting the legislature. So I'm going to make a big push on this again this year. Hopefully we'll have success with that. Then the third bill I'll talk about is I've got a teacher collective bargaining bill, which was brought to me by ISTA, which would allow teachers to bargain some of the things that were taken away in the past, like hours worked, some conditions, things like that. But one of the areas that I think is important as we talk about teacher pay this year, school corporations are allowed to put a certain amount of money into a fund that they can't use for collective bargaining. And right now, collectively across the state of Indiana, school corporations have put into that fund $1.4 billion that they don't use to negotiate teacher salaries. So we're going to try to open that up and allow bargaining units to use some of that money for teacher pay.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Ford, and thank you to all of our legislators for being here. Now, we should note Representative Alan Morrison from the 42nd District is not here today, but we do want to make it clear that we have invited him to this event. So his contact information will also be in the chat if you would like to reach out to him. At this time, we would like to give special thanks to our sponsors for today's event. So I'm going to read each name and you can, I guess, applaud from them in the comfort of your own home today. But first up, we have the Vigo County Public Library, of course, the League of Women Voters of Vigo County, the Will Center, Vigo County Teachers Association, the Vigo County Taxpayers Association, and the Greater Terre Haute branch of the NAACP. And we are certainly very, very grateful for all of our sponsors to be able to make this event and events like these possible. At this time, we're going to start asking some questions of our legislators today, and I just kind of want to go over some good of the order things. You can submit your questions a couple of ways. You can submit them in the chat right here on Zoom, and you go to, if you're on a laptop, at the bottom of your screen where that little talking box says chat, and just type it in, and a library representative will look over your question, and then they'll get that question to me. And if we have time, and if it's the right amount and all those good things, I will ask it to our legislators. Or if you can't do that, if you can't type for any reason, excuse me, it's early, my voice, you can call a number, and that number is 812-645-3631. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that number will also be in the chat so that you'll be able to see it. And actually, forgive me, you can go to the Q&A button, not the chat button, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your question, and those will be given to me, and I will give those to the legislators. And as always, which we always do a wonderful job, we ask that your questions remain respectful and courteous to each of our representatives and senator, and that you're respectful to everyone. And we'll try to get through as many as we can. We have about 57 participants, which is fantastic for a venue like this. So we hopefully will be able to get to everyone. But at this point, I'm going to start with some sponsor questions. We have a couple sponsor questions. And again, we're going to go just to each representative or senator who would like to answer this question. And we ask that you be mindful of time. If you can take about a minute to a minute and a half to answer the question, depending on what the question is, we'll take it from there. But the first question comes from the League of Women Voters of Vigo County. And it says, because of the increase in vote by mail and challenges with the United States Postal Service, are there any plans for legislation to consider statewide rules for voter ballot drop-off boxes? What is your position on this issue, and what are your views on how we as a state can make voting more accessible to Hoosiers? So we're talking about voter accessibility and the potential for voter ballot drop-off boxes. So this is kind of what we'll do. We will start, since we started with Representative Orders last time, let's start with Representative Heaton, if you would like to answer this question.
Okay, sure. I haven't seen any bills out there that is going to utilize dealing with that, but I couldn't tell you. Now, I think somebody, I don't know who's on elections, but Tanya, she may be, but that would have to go through that committee. But again, like I said, the filing deadline is Thursday, and I'm trying to go through, taking a weekend here, going through some of the bills already that's been filed. But I know Representative, I think Pat Boy, she's got a couple bills that deals with voting and so forth. But I don't know where we are with all the bills that haven't been filed yet. So we'll see where it goes from here.
All right, well, let's go ahead and hop over to Representative Path and have your thoughts on this question.
I'm all in favor of drop-off boxes. So I remember in May, a good friend of mine who has some health problems wanted to deliver her absentee ballot. And the process was she had to get out of her car, which she has trouble walking, and then she had to go and hand it to a security guard at the Vigo County Courthouse. And then the guard had to walk it over and deposit it at the courthouse. We should be making, voting as easy as possible, mindful very much of, not having any fraud or anything like that. But our election system, the way it is right now, is so secure. I can't think of any instances that have come up in Indiana during this past year that we had any kind of fraud. So, I'm all about making voting as accessible as possible.
Thank you very much, Representative Path. Representative Borders or Senator Ford, do either of you have something you'd like to say on this?
I'll say, from the legislation that's been assigned to our committee, there has been nothing on vote by mail at this point. I've been supportive of vote by mail in the past, and I do know when we look at other states that have had successful vote by mail programs, drop-off boxes are a large part of it in Colorado and Oregon. So, I'm not opposed to it. I just haven't seen any legislation at this point on it.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Borders?
Am I muted or unmuted right now?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I couldn't remember for sure on this. Okay, I'm actually not in favor of the drop-off boxes. I think that in-person voting, quite frankly, where people are physically able to, results in the greatest transparency. And I know, at least based on a number of the battleground states, the drop-off boxes seem to be where there was a lot of the mischief that potentially occurred. And so, quite frankly, I think that the drop-off boxes, we've already made it. We've lengthened the time in which you can vote. We've made it very easy to vote by absentee, ballot and so forth, and almost with no excuse absentee anymore. And so again, I think we've made it very easy to vote, and I think the drop-off boxes are basically inviting potential voter fraud. And I can speak as someone that's been a victim of voter fraud. I know in two of the races that I've lost, in both cases, there was voter fraud that was involved, and in fact, an individual actually ended up going to prison as a result of it, and we got the FBI involved and so forth. So I'm not somebody that speaks about this without any past experience or having been harmed by it in the past, and I think the drop-off boxes would be inviting a ton of mischief, and I would not be for that.
All right. Well, we will move on now. And one more time, the interesting thing about this venue right now is that the audience feedback is non-existent. So, but you do have an opportunity to reach out to the legislators. We have their contact information. So please send them an email, leave them a voice message, and you can always have that conversation with them, even if you can't do it necessarily today. But let's move on to a question from the Vigo County Teachers Association. And it says, in light of the release of the next level teacher compensation report and its findings, will you support increasing the per pupil funding level, ADM, adjusting the complexity index to increase funding available to schools in high poverty areas, and support the exemption for districts that consolidate, allowing those districts to not have to sell or lease vacant buildings to charter schools for $1? And if you do not support any of these, please explain why. So we will start right now. We started with Representative Heaton. Let's start with Representative Path, who also happens to be a teacher.
Yes and yes. Do I need to go on?
If you'd like.
Well, so the way student funding is figured out is this very complex formula, but the problem is it's just not doing it. So again, during COVID, I think every parent out there realized how important teachers are, and the fact that their kids really do want to go to school, in-person learning. And once we get them in school, we have a really good success rate in Indiana. Our public schools are doing a great job. but they need help. You know, since the property tax caps came on, we just don't have the money that we need to support all the services that our schools provide. So yes, absolutely, I would support it. And what was, Renjo, I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Second part was, would you support exemption for districts that consolidate, allowing these districts to not have to sell or lease vacant buildings to charter schools for $1? Yeah.
Right, absolutely. So right now, so we're trying to get school corporations to right size, correct? So, you know, if you think of Vigo County, we're talking right now about shutting down Vigo Elementary and Deming. And by law, if we vacate those buildings, then a charter can come in for $1, purchase property. We're fortunate, I think anyway, in Vigo County that we don't have any charters right now, but lots of corporations are fighting this. And again, you know, that means if the more charters there are, the less dollars there are to public education. So
you are in favor of that. Let's move on to Senator Ford. That same question.
Yeah, I think, you know, school funding this year is going to be a complex issue. I think, you know, we know that we're going to hear about legislation where we're going to move the funding for students that are online from 85% to 100%. That'll be a large fiscal hit. And then we're also going to look at head counts. Do we hold schools to the 2020 head counts, or do we let them use the 19 head counts? Again, that'll have a fiscal impact. So I can't really commit to what we're going to do. I mean, our goal is always to come in and have a balanced budget and provide more money for education. So we'll see. I think, like Bruce said and Bob, that we're in a much better position than we thought we would be in June. In terms of facilities, I mean, I don't know enough about that subject to speak about it, but I do think, you know, the school boards do have some say in this process, and they can go to local governments as well, if I remember correctly. But, you know, I think school boards are able to make those decisions and have to make some of these tough decisions, as Tanya said, as they right size.
Thank you, Senator
Thank you.
Ford. Let's move along to Representative Border. Same question.
I'm unmuted now, right?
You are unmuted,
Okay.
yes.
I'm getting to the trick of it here, but okay. As far as, you know, again, the funding, you know, our goal is obviously to fully fund. Now, as far as I think the initial question was, can we increase the per pupil amount as opposed to where the figures were at from the last biennial budget? And I'm sure that if we're able to, it's very likely that we will. Again, you know, I don't serve on Ways and Means. I think Bob and Tanya both do, I believe, right? I think both of them do. But anyhow, having said that, as we get into our numbers, we'll know more about that as we progress into session. And we typically always try to do that if it's possible. As far as the question on the, as far as the renting the school facilities that have been closed to a charter school for $1. I mean, I actually do represent some charter schools in my district, and I mean, I have no problem with that. I mean, it's you know, for example, I'll use the community of Duggar. You know, Duggar has a very good school there. You know, they had lost their traditional public school, but you know, one of the things that I've always emphasized is that a charter school is indeed a public school, and I know the parents and all of the citizens of the Duggar community, and also over at Graysville at the Rural Academy, they've worked very hard to keep their schools going, and they're doing well. You know, again, they're just simply another type of public school. But again, if we've got a building that's available and a community is in need of that building, and the taxpayers have paid for it, I have no problem with them being able to rent or to lease that building for the $1 and you know, and keep a vibrant school going.
All right. Thank you very much, Representative Borders. And finally, Representative Heaton. Same questions.
Okay, I think that's a good question. You know, 2 years ago, I voted to fund K through 12 education, public schools. And then that new money amount was $763 million. And again, with this budget year that we're dealing with, we don't know what that number is going to be. But in working with the committee chair in Ways and Means, Dr. Tim Brown, and then it's eventually going to go over to the Senate. We'll see where that what that final number is going to be, but it ought to be a good amount. But keep in mind, you know, when it comes to charter schools, and I give credit to the Democrat Party years ago, 19 and a half years ago, the Democrats voted to allow charter schools in the state of Indiana. And that was Senate Enrolled Act 165, and the sponsor of that bill was in the House was Senator Greg Porter, African-American state representative from Marion County. And it was signed by Governor Frank O'Bannon. So, and I don't know how many charter schools we have in the state of Indiana. I don't know if it's in the 70s or 80, the number is, but where do you see a lot of those charter schools? In Marion County and Lake County, and then they're throughout the whole state as well. But I think I've got one in my district and down in Ellettsville. But there's again, and there's a need, and we dealt with this 10 years ago. That the money follows the child, and so no matter where you're at. Getting back, I agree with what Representative Border said about the funding, $1 for that building for potentially a charter school, and I'm fine with that. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. And I know it's been a concern to some superintendents, school superintendents out there. You know, gosh, if we have this building open, potentially there could be a charter school come in there. And but again, bottom line is, I think overall, I think school corporations, schools are doing a great job, and it's a trying time right now. But again, we always deal with this year after year, because when you look at the total budget, more than half of that budget goes towards K through 12 funding. And then on top of that, we deal with higher ed as well, another 12, 13%. So, but anyway, we'll see where, again, this budget year, this long session goes, and we'll see how much money we have to fund public education in the next few weeks and months to come.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Heaton. And we're moving along now to our public questions. And again, these are questions that have been submitted by you at home. If you would like to do that, there's a Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and also the number 812-645-3631. We're asking that our legislators take 90 seconds to answer the question. I did this on the last virtual forum. Good indicator when you see me smile, and I could be enjoying your answer, and most times I am, but when you see me smile, that's a great time to say, all right, I'll kind of wrap it up if you could. Be so courteous. Thank you. All right, first question we're going to start with comes from Vicki Walsh. And she asks, I would like a reaction from each panelist on the insurrection at the Capitol. And of course, we know this happened this last Wednesday. So we will start now with, let's go to Senator Ford to answer this question first.
Well, thank you. I know Tanya wanted to answer that one first, but I'll go ahead. Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw, I mean, I'm not a believer in violence of any kind, and it was a sad day, I think, to see what happened there. I think we can find better ways to voice our differences. And, you know, like I said, I don't support any type of violence. I didn't support the violence that happened earlier in the year, and I don't support this violence either.
Let's go to Representative Heaton. If we could unmute.
There we go. Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't mind protests and rallies as long as they're peaceful. And so what happened this past Wednesday, it was, I think, uncalled for, and it's unfortunate that it got out of hand and people lost their lives in dealing with this. So it's quite unfortunate, and hopefully it doesn't happen again. But you know, when you so we'll just we'll see how the rallies go in the future. Again, I I know locally there was some peaceful marches this past summer, and again, that's okay. But when it gets into violence and riots and looting and that type of thing, I'm totally against it. So.
Make our way to, thank you very much. We'll make our way to Representative Borders.
First of all, I think a lot of the accusations that have been thrown at potential Trump supporters are completely fraudulent. What's interesting is if you look at some of the, I've seen some of the information that was put out by Antifa inviting people to join in with the Trump crowd, the Trump supporters, and they in fact, they even said you can go on the internet and numerous articles and look at the ads that they put out telling people to be sure and wear MAGA hats, that Make America Great Again, MAGA t-shirts, Trump t-shirts, and so forth. And then here's an article that I've got. It's from theamericanthinker.com. It's called "The Breach of the Capitol Was an Obvious Setup." It actually just came out January the 9th, which would be today, by Patricia McCarthy. And what's interesting is if you look at some of the videos, while they were debating about whether or not to support the Electoral College, actually people were being invited into the United States Capitol. And if you look at the Trump supporters, the vast majority of them, there were some that got out of hand, but in terms of some of the violence and the bullhorns and so forth, what's interesting is that those were not, it's felt that those were not Trump supporters. That was Antifa basically jumping in and trying to distract from the discussion as to the fraudulent votes that were cast during the election, the presidential election this year. And I do feel like it was an absolute distraction. It was a way of taking away from the discussion, the serious discussion that was held about the fraudulent votes that were cast in a number of the battleground states. And then, and then for our congressmen and senators from both sides of the aisle, I've heard it from both sides of the aisle, to talk about these hallowed halls and to go on about how, they've desecrated and so forth. I'm like, come on, all year long, we've seen these rallies where statues have been toppled. I mean, you had an owner of a Wendy's in Atlanta, Georgia. Their Wendy's was burnt down, and yet some of the same media that's freaking out about that, about the deal in Washington, had no problem with the private owner losing the Wendy's. So I think I think there's a lot of fraud behind this.
All right. Thank you very much, Representative Borders. And we will leave the final word on this topic to Representative Taft.
Well, plain and simple, I thought it was horrible. It was an insurrection, and when lives are cost, 5 people have died because of what happened on Wednesday. So I've participated myself in peaceful protests. I think that's one of the things that makes America so great is our freedom of speech. But the moment people turn violent, then it's no longer a peaceful protest, and steps need to be taken. I was quite frankly shocked that people were willing to just break windows in the building and climb the walls and rifle through people's desks. And, I don't think any of those videos lie. That is what people chose to do. There was no question. There was way too many people, and the Capitol Police were overrun. But the whole way that it was handled, if you go back to the summer and all the BLM movements and the response to police in those cases and the response for the police on Wednesday, I mean, we have a real serious issue in America that we really need to deal with. And let's just hope a day like Wednesday never happens again.
Thank you very much, Representative Taft, for that. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. And this comes from, actually, we don't have a source for this one, but I'll read it either way from the public. People all over the state and country and locally have been feeling the effects of this pandemic, and they're worried about paying rent, bills, medical issues, and a variety of other things. What legislation are you or your colleagues trying to implement this session to alleviate some of those concerns? And to begin this off, let's start with Representative Borders.
The best thing that we can do to alleviate the economic suffering of people is to open up our economy. If you look at the statistics even provided by the CDC and the cases of deaths that are just COVID-19 related alone, it's like 6% of all of the cases that are turned in. And I know one of the figures I looked at in December, I believe there were a total of around 270,000 deaths attributed to COVID-19, but only 6% of those were COVID-19 only. The others all had comorbidities, and at 6%, you're looking at somewhere, I believe, around 16,000. Again, every death is tragic, but I will also tell you this, that from what I'm hearing, I've talked with a number of emergency directors with hospitals, dealt with several county health supervisors, and I know for a fact of numerous cases where individuals have died from causes. A good friend of mine had terminal lung cancer for several years. His death was labeled as COVID-19, even though he had had terminal lung cancer. And so I was talking with his sister-in-law, and I said, well, why did they label it COVID-19? She said, I don't know. Everybody knew that he had terminal lung cancer. Well, it's, again, there's a difference of morbidity. Did someone die from COVID-19, or did they die with it along with other symptoms? And I think we need to take a look at the comorbidities, but I believe that it's well past time that we open our economy back up. If you look at those states that have closed down radically, they have worse morbidity rates than those states, for example, like South Dakota, who have kept their doors open, and like Florida, who has opened up a lot. And so one of the things I have recently done is signed on to as a co-author of a resolution to end the state of emergency, to open our economy back up again. People know how to protect themselves. But again, we're putting people out of work unnecessarily. We're closing down businesses, and Wall Street is booming. These big corporations where mom and pop businesses are dying on the vine, and we're closing down businesses unnecessarily. It's time for us to get our schools completely back open and allow businesses to open back up.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Borders. Moving along now to Representative Heaton.
Okay, for the most part, I agree with what Representative Borders said. The thing about, I think the one part of the question, Rontrell, was dealing with, any bills or anything.
Right.
And again, I don't know what's out there yet as far as bills, and if they're going to get a hearing and so forth, that type of thing. But that may come through, if it does, go through public policy. I'm not on public policy, that committee, but if they do allow that to be heard, it will go through that committee. So, but it's something, I know the, for instance, suicide rate, and I hate to say it or bring it up, my son committed suicide a few years ago, and it's always a touchy subject, but I think the suicide rate is, I read recently, like 600% increase over, I don't know if that's a national thing, but it's something, and that's because people are, hunkering down, and they're locked down, and it affects them with anxiety and stress and depression and so forth. But that's something that needs to be looked at. So anyway, but we'll see how if those bills, and again, like I said earlier, that the filing deadline is coming up this coming Thursday, but we'll see if that does, any of those bills get a hearing and proceed through the process through the General Assembly.
Thank you very much. And moving on now, let's hear from Representative Tanf.
Rondrell, I was a little fired up. Can you repeat the question?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, the question says people all over the state and country and locally have been feeling the effects of this pandemic, and they're worried about paying rent, bills, medical issues, and a variety of other things. What legislation are you or your colleagues trying to implement that could alleviate those concerns?
Thank you. I got the gist of it. I just wasn't sure on the details. So, it's interesting. Before I got in this office, I always thought, well, why don't these representatives and senators know the bills? and then I got in the office. And so right now at the beginning, we've only been here since Monday, and the bills aren't even filed yet. So really, just as Bob said, we don't really know what's out there. I just noticed in the chat, the Vigo County Library put the link for where you can go and look at the bills.
Yes.
Now, just, because I'm a teacher, I like to explain things. Just so you know, just because they're filed doesn't mean they'll ever get heard. So when you ask what legislation is out there, that's one of my jobs this weekend, is to go through and just look at all the bills that have actually been proposed. And we don't really talk, even in our caucus, we never talk to each other and say, hey, there's 29 of us, I guess now, what bills are you proposing? Because we just simply don't see each other. So I know I'm not really answering the question, but I know that COVID-19 has certainly really hurt a lot of people. Our healthcare system really needs looked at, and that will be one big thing of this session. And also rent assistance, that is absolutely needed, but we also need to look at landlord assistance as well. Because, if you don't make people pay rent, on the other side, the landlords, who some of my friends own a lot of houses, that's their income. And so it's a double whammy. So again, as all big issues, we need to take a really hard look at what's going on in the state of Indiana. And I think it's just more important to help people than to continually build our surplus.
Thank you so much, Representative Path. And finally, Senator Ford.
Yeah. So, in terms of legislation I'm working on, I think that Tanf bill, again, gives a lot of folks opportunities and support to maybe move professions in this time, maybe to move from hospitality to advanced manufacturing. But it's a program that provides everything from food, daycare, job training, workforce development. So I think that's one good piece. I can say that, through some of the CARES Act funding, the state of Indiana has given a lot of grants out there for rent support and rent programs. Our trustees have a system in place like they've had for years to help with rental and utility assistance. And then I do know, in terms of mental health, the state again is doing a number of CARES Act grants right now. Matter of fact, as we speak, they're accepting applications from local communities to support mental health, landlords, renters. So there are a number of programs out there in place. Lots of money for food banks as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I was smiling, Senator Ford, not necessarily to wrap you up, but just because Representative from the library just said, these are all the questions. We have so many questions from people, which is a really wonderful thing, but that also means that we'll have to get through them as quickly as we can. I have so many follow-up questions as a journalist to a lot of the things that you all have said, but this is not the venue for that. But again, we just want to reiterate, and if you have follow-up questions, you can reach out to these legislators. We have all of their contact information right there in the chat. That question also, we should know, was from Sarah Dillon. We found that information out. Okay, next question comes from Ross, and I believe it's pronounced Kadick. And it says, taking into account the Governor's Commission on teachers' pay recommendations on how to increase the pay of Indiana educators, how much of the budget surplus are you willing to utilize Indiana's low average teacher compensation? Thank you. This request. So we're talking about teacher compensation and using the budget surplus to kind of supplant that. So let's start this time with Senator Ford first.
Thank you. I believe in having the surplus. I think it really helps communities save a lot of money. And I'll be, to be frank, I'm not sure how much money we could send to schools and if it would make it to teachers. You take the Vigo County Teachers Association, voted on a collective bargaining agreement that gave very little money to new teachers. But yet we in the budget that we're currently operating put 4% of new money to send to schools, but it's not finding its way to the teachers, and certainly not to new teachers. And I'm not sure what we can do at the state level to ensure that that money gets to teachers. I think the part that's been missing is holding school board members accountable, because they're the ones making a lot of these tough decisions. And I think we could send down the whole surplus. I can't guarantee you new teachers in Vigo County are going to get paid one dime more.
Thank you very much, Senator Ford. Let's move on now to Representative Heaton to answer that same question.
Okay, well, I agree with what Senator Ford said, and I echo his response. But the thing of it is, the state of Indiana doesn't want to get in a position where they're going to say, okay, Vigo County School Corporation, Clay Community Schools, Spencer Owen, here's what you got to do with this money, and you need to pay this teacher, that teacher, and so forth, X amount of dollars. The state of Indiana doesn't want to do that. We want to provide that money and new money to the different corporations and allow the collective bargaining unit, the administration there at the school corporation to make that decision. And so it's, again, we don't want to, and that's the same thing, even money going to higher ed. You know, we don't want to really get into that too and say, well, here's, you got to use this money for this, this, and this. But anyway, it's up to the individuals or the people involved in making those decisions. But again, with as far as using money from the surplus, I'm not in favor of that. And I know Representative Pat and I talked after Ways and Means Committee the other day. We still need to keep enough in there to maintain our Standard & Poor's AAA rating for, you know, providing funding for different colleges and so forth at a very low rate. And that's just going to save the taxpayers millions of dollars in the long run by doing so.
Thank you very much, Representative Heaton. Representative Paff, let's move to you.
You know, it's a good question. And as you can tell by the previous two, there's not a good answer. What I can say is, you know, as a teacher waiting for the teacher report that the governor formed a commission of 12 business leaders, not putting one teacher on that. After 18 months, they finally released it. And one of the highlights was that teachers across Indiana are, in order to get us up to par with the other surrounding states, it would cost $600 million. That's a huge hit, especially right now in this season when so many other entities are suffering, right? So it's not all about teachers. However, something needs to be done because we continue to lose teachers. We're losing teachers to, they're driving across the borders to teach in other states because they get higher pay. And, you know, our pay is not keeping up with even the rate of inflation. So when you ask how much of the budget, quite honestly, I don't know because I just got on Ways and Means. So part of my personal mission is to just figure out where is all the money going. But Senator Ford had a good point. You know, it has to also come down to the local level where our school boards are looking at what are we spending money on? How much did we get? But again, it also goes back to charter and vouchers in public. When you have one pie, you know, the more you cut out from public education, the less that is coming down as well. So it's a very complicated situation, but something has to be done.
Thank you, Representative Paff. And finally, Representative Borders.
One of the concerns that I've got, I know, you know, when they talk about the budget surplus, but quite frankly, and actually those of you that are serving on Ways and Means may know the figure better than I do, but I know we had to borrow, I believe, several $100 million to shore up our unemployment fund, I believe, if I'm not mistaken on that. And again, because of the strange times in which we're living, you know, I think a lot of the, you know, again, the pandemic has a lot to do with it. I'm not sure that we've handled it completely as wisely as we could have in terms of just completely shutting things down, at least, or at a point we had shut things down to a great degree as far as your mom and pop businesses, restaurants, and so forth. Anyhow, having said that, I think we really do need to be to guard any surplus money that we have, because I'm not so sure that it's actually going to be surplus as much as we do have obligations in, you know, in additional areas. Again, we obviously always try to fund, you know, to fully fund education, but we do have, we've got our, you know, the Medicaid spending, we have Department of Corrections, we have the police force, you know, to deal with. We've got unemployment and so forth. And so, quite frankly, I think we need to be pretty cautious about taking on additional spending until we are able to make sure that we've made it through this pandemic economically sound. Anyhow.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to try to speed up the process just a bit here. We have easily 15 more questions and about 15 more minutes to get through all of them, roughly or so. So we're going to ask each representative and senator to take about a minute to respond if you can. The next question comes from Tiffany Baker with Three Sisters Investments. And she says, we have several new small businesses who are opening up in 2021 in the Wabash Valley. What resources are available to them as they work to grow our hometown in the Wabash Valley? Representative Borders, we'll start with you this time around. About a minute, please.
I'll be honest with you, as the owner of several small businesses myself, I'm not sure that there is a pool of money that they can jump into. I mean, I know everybody talks about applying for loans to the Small Business Association and our Small Business Administration and so forth. But when I've tried to help businesses in my district to obtain those loans, it's tougher than nails to get them. And a lot of times, even if you are able to get them, by the time you jump through all the hoops, they found it's not worth it. So I don't want to pretend that I have an answer that's not there. I mean, I haven't found, everybody thinks, government's got all of this pool of money that can be divvied out there. I mean, if they approach each of us, we can go to the Lieutenant Governor's office and a lot of the grants that are applied for, we can maybe help in that area, but I'm not aware of a specific fund that's just easily accessible at the moment.
Okay, and another amendment that we will add to, I'll put the question out there, and because everybody can't necessarily talk at the same time, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, I'll call on you. We'll do it classroom setting. Representative Paff, I'm sure you'll appreciate that. And we'll go from there so that we can expedite these questions as much as possible. That way, not everybody necessarily has to answer every single question. So does anybody else have anything they'd like to add about small businesses? Yes, Representative Paff.
Just encourage Tiffany to, if she hasn't already, which I'm sure she has, reach out to the Chamber of Commerce. They're our best source of information for small businesses.
All right, fantastic. Senator Ford.
I would say also, one thing that I think our community is lacking a little bit are revolving loan funds. Many communities in the state of Indiana get support from the state to create revolving loan funds that can then help small businesses get some of the training that they need and some of the funding to move forward.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And this question comes from Jennifer Todd. She asks, can someone please explain the redistricting process and any related bills? Will Indiana use an outside nonpartisan group to complete this process? So again, we'll ask this to the dais, and raise your hand if you have a question or if you have an answer for this. Representative Borders.
Well, I know that everybody talks about a nonpartisan group on the redistricting, and I've always, my answer to that has always been there is no such thing, and I still believe that. Quite frankly, the Republicans have the majority again this year, here in the state of Indiana anyhow, and so we'll draw the maps, and again, it's, I've found in the past that, when the Democrats had the majority, they drew the maps, and I just think it's just a bunch of smoke and mirrors to talk about this magical, nonpartisan group that's going to somehow come up. All it takes is one more member to be Democrat or one more to be Republican for it to be balanced one way or the other. And so I'm not going to beat around the bush and pretend that there's another answer other than that. And so the Republicans will draw the maps again this year.
All right, thank you very much. And Representative Heaton, I saw your hand.
Yeah, well, as we know, every 10 years we draw the maps and deal with the redistricting once the census numbers come in. But I might add that 10 years ago, I don't know, about 20 years ago and 30 years ago, when the Democrats drew the maps 20 years ago and 30 years ago, but 10 years ago, it was bipartisan vote. Former Representative, I believe, Clyde Kersey, he voted for the new district that was drawn 10 years ago, as well as my colleague down in Bloomington, Representative Matt Pierce. He voted for it as well. So sometimes we think, well, it just the Republicans voted, all the Republicans voted that way, or all the Democrats voted against it, but it was bipartisan votes. One thing I might add that, we're still in the supermajority. The Republicans are in the House and the Senate, but House District number 7, which is up in northern Indiana, that was a Republican now owns that seat, Representative Jake Teska. And he's the first Republican to hold that seat in 40 years. And he won that race by 2,170 votes. So anyway, it's up to the people to decide who they want and to represent them for that particular district.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Heaton. And Representative Path.
So I'm kind of a numbers person. So when you look at the way the maps were drawn, right now 71 Republicans in the House and 29 Democrats. And I don't believe that the state of Indiana is only 29% Democrat. I believe the numbers are running around 43%. So in my mind, a nonpartisan commission, have both sides come together, draw the maps so that they're more equal. So, obviously the Republicans will want to stay in charge. Okay, but can we even it out so it's like, 52-48? When we even it out, when we make it more fair, we'll get candidates who actually want to run for office. There's so many districts that people go unopposed because they're highly gerrymandered, Democrat and Republican. So nobody's going to run against them because the numbers are too high. When you have a 65-70% Republican district, a Democrat doesn't have a chance, and vice versa. It works both ways. So for me, the end result would be better bills, because if you have more in the middle where it's 52-48, you actually have to speak to each other and you get input from both sides of the aisle instead of just one. So that's me.
All right. And finally, Senator Ford.
Thank you. So, as someone who has supported in the past forming some kind of independent committee, that ship has sailed. We're now here. I think this year, again, we keep talking about COVID, but it will play a role in that we are waiting for the census data. Normally we get it in March. We'll see when we get it this time, but that census data where populations have moved will play a large role. Like, we know the Carmel area has attracted a lot of new residents, so those districts are going to be changed. I do think, if you look at our county prosecutors as a good example, those county lines were drawn long time ago. And the majority, around 80% of the county prosecutors are Republican. So I think it may just be that, right now the state has moved to the right. And, I think in the past we have drawn the districts, especially the 2011 districts, have gotten great reviews from independent sources that we drew them very fairly. So I will think we will have that same kind of process this time. I know there'll be machines set up at some universities for people to go in and voice their opinion that way. We also, Speaker Houston has said publicly that there will be some legislators that hit the road to get public input, and that'll be sometime in the spring.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to the next question. This one comes from Carrie Labella. And the question is, why does Indiana still allow straight ticket voting? Are there any other bills coming that would change that? Indiana is one of 6 states left in the country that still uses this system. And who would like to answer that question? Senator Ford?
So there's no bills that I've read at this point, but like Tanya and Bob have said, we're still a lot of bills to come. I've not seen any bills on straight party tickets. I can tell you in the past, when someone has filed legislation, it's again, a bipartisan effort to kill that bill. Both parties are not interested in getting rid of straight tickets.
Representative Path.
So this issue came up on elections last year, and is exactly what John said. It passed through our committee in a bipartisan support to eliminate it, and then that bill was never heard again. So it made it through committee, and then it just died. So apparently, I mean, I'm in support because I think every person that goes to the voting booth should vote for the individual and go down the ticket, not just push one button and be done. And also, you know, if you do straight party ticket voting, you know, there's those races like school board that you have to make an effort to go down. If it's choosing more than one, school board and county council, you know, that's a problem because a lot of people don't know if you hit that button that you have to continue voting. And so we lose a lot of votes that way. So I'm in favor of eliminating it.
Thank you very much, Representative Path. And just want to make a note here. We've gotten a few questions that are directly to certain senators or representatives. We're asking that you go ahead and email them your questions. And again, we have that information for you in the chat. All right, the next question that I will ask comes from Liz Gentry. And it says, in light of the racial injustices that were highlights in 2020, what reforms are being discussed in the State House and which reforms would you support? Body cams for police, non-lethal weapons, banning chokeholds, implicit bias training, increasing funding to social services to respond to nonviolent crises. She mentions those as potential solutions to that question. But again, that question is for everyone. Representative Heaton.
Well, again, I've got in front of me here, I've got the list of bills that we have filed so far in the Senate. We're up to Senate Bill 269, and in the House, we're at House Bill 1305. And so I really don't know what bills have been filed that pertains to that particular question, or potentially what bills can be filed next week that will deal with that. But again, it can be frustrating. That first year I was in there 10 years ago, it is a process. You think you may have a good bill and it may not even get a hearing. So, and hopefully that's the goal, to get a hearing and get the conversation started. But I don't believe I do not know anything out there right now that pertains to those issues that this individual wanted to be discussed.
Okay, we had Senator Ford's hand and then Representative Path right after that.
You know, I'm not sure, you know, what bills are out there. I'm sure there'll be some bills that come through on the Senate side to deal with social justice. You know, for me, when it comes to body cams and law enforcement procedures, you know, I think we can deal with that at the local level, just like the Terre Haute police this summer voted or decided to add body cams. So I think that can be left to local decisions. I don't think we need to make every decision at the state level. I will tell you a bill I do have, misdemeanor reimbursements for public defenders. This was brought to me by a local public defender's office. And, you know, there are a lot of people in our county jails, in our state prisons that had a misdemeanor and it snowballed into something more. And because they didn't have adequate defense, and they, you know, the goal is the state to send more money to the counties to fund public defenders at the misdemeanor level, because more and more of our crimes, we have moved them to misdemeanors from felonies. So I think this is something that could help deal with folks that are in jail.
And Representative Path.
I just wanted to say real quickly, the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus on the Democrat side has put together like 5 or 6 bills. So I know we'll be hearing about this issue, and it is so important that it really deserves a lot of conversation at the State House.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. And this one comes from Ted Shenderna, and it's kind of one that's individually for him, but I think it could radiate to a lot of Hoosiers out there. And it says, what can be done if IRS skips your second stimulus for $600 currently? He said he tried filing a 1040 SR and entered the amount on line 30 and it mailed it in. IRS has no tracking on it except for the previous sent in April. He says he's on poverty level SSI income only. And so by saying that, basically kind of the bigger picture is for folks who maybe didn't get the 600 stimulus here, or that are dealing with poverty during the pandemic, what are some options or what may be working through the State House that may be able to help them out? Representative Borders?
As I've shared before, I still believe that the number one thing that we can do to help everyone, whether they're poverty level, whether they're middle class, whether they're upper income, is to open up the economy. And again, I think we can do that without risking the health of our areas. Again, if you look at those states that have kept themselves more open versus those that have clamped down, they're actually their COVID numbers are no worse, and in many cases better. And so, not that the $600 isn't important, but to me, the worst thing is the fact that we're having to force people to rely on that $600 as opposed to letting them run their businesses. Again, whether it be a mom and pop restaurant, I've talked to a number of restaurant owners over the course of this that are, they've literally had to shut down for a period of time. Number of businesses, my daughter and son-in-law run some businesses that they had to completely shut down for a period of time and had to borrow money to pay employees and so forth. And it's just, again, I think that so much of this completely shutting down of the economy was absolutely unnecessary. And I resent the fact that the government is basically saying, hey, we're here on your side, here's $600, whenever they're destroying their complete abilities to make an income. Not that the $600 isn't helpful and isn't necessary in some cases, but ultimately the best thing that we can do for people is to stop the nonsense, open up the economy, and let businesses thrive and prosper again so they can feed their families and so their businesses can survive. Many of those businesses that have shut down are never going to come back. I was reading a figure where as many as 40% of them may not ever open their doors again. And that's like Bob mentioned earlier about the suicide rates and so forth. The best thing we can do for people is to open the economy back up.
Right. Did anyone else want to comment on that specific question?
I would encourage folks, if they have a problem with getting that federal stimulus check, to reach out to their federal delegation, because really at the state level, there's not too much we can really do in terms of getting those checks from the U.S. Treasury.
Okay, it looks like we have time for maybe one more question. And this is, as have most of our questions been themed, involving education. And it comes from Andrea Arrington Sirwa, and I'm pretty sure I butchered that last name, but it says, what measures are you taking to protect what's left of state funding for our universities? Will higher ed be supported as we see the fallout from COVID-19 and declining enrollments? Representative Heaton.
Well, again, just like K through 12 funding, we do look at higher ed, and that's, we don't know what that number is, but they will be, I don't want to assume anything, but they'll be funded. At what level, we don't know yet. I think going back 2 years ago, that number was $2 billion. So you break that down over 2 years, that's $1 billion each year. But that takes into account, Vincent's University, Ivy Tech, USI, of course, IU, Purdue, Ball State, Indiana State, and probably leaving somebody out. Don't mean to do that, but anyway, there's a lot of need out there. But on the other hand, we're going to have to just see where the numbers shake out and take it from there. But I know that Purdue, for instance, they're looking at as well as Indiana State and others. They're saying, well, we're going to like to renovate or redo this building and so forth. And then I think Indiana State up here, I didn't go through a walkthrough, but I talked to Indiana State representatives recently, and I think their technology building, they were looking for $36.7 million to renovate the technology building on campus, and we'll just see where that goes. But I've also talked to some representatives from the Board of Trustees about Indiana State's recommendations, and they're saying, well, hey, we can put that aside for the capital projects, but let's focus on operations and so forth if need be. But we'll just see how much money we have to fund the higher ed sector and take it from there.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Heaton. Anyone else like to take on that topic? Senator Ford.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's tough times for higher education. I think, they did get some federal relief in the CARES Act, and I believe in this recent round of stimulus, there is some money there for the institutions, but also for the students. I have had a number of folks reach out that they haven't been happy with the switch to online, and they're hoping that universities will come back into a normal education period. But I do think we're committed at the state of Indiana to continue to help higher ed move forward. They do have some challenging times coming, COVID aside. We are kind of in a demographic gap where the next 6 to 8 years there'll be less kids going to college. So it's going to be competitive, and they're going to have to maybe change some of the things that they're doing. And I think we're starting to see that in higher education in Indiana. Thank you.
All right. And Representative Borders, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, and I know I sound maybe like a one-trick pony on this, but I've talked with a number of teachers, and Tanya, defer to you as well on this, but whether it be a college professor, whether it be a high school teacher, elementary ed, I mean, ultimately, all of them are wanting to get back to a normal classroom type of setting. And I talked to a friend of mine who teaches math down in Sullivan County, and he told me, he said, Bruce, he said, this remote learning is not working. He said, and I think it's going to apply to colleges as well. And I know the question was more about the finances, but the fact of it is that, a lot of the students, there are going to be some students that have opted out of traditional education, that they're going to have a tough time getting them back in there, just simply because they're not going to trust the system, so to speak, and the same with colleges. And so again, I'm going to just keep beating that drum. We have got to get things open back up, whether it be our schools, whether it be our colleges, whether it be our businesses, and it's got to happen immediately. We can't keep waiting. We're going to destroy this country if we don't do that.
Right, and finally, Representative Path.
So at this point, higher education is just as important as K through 12. Education is such an economic driving force, and ISU contributes so much to our community, as does Rose-Hulman, St. Mary's, and Ivy Tech. I mean, it is an economic development tool. So what we need to do is encourage more and more people to go back to college, to stay in. I know a lot of people are taking gap years. I still have 2 in college myself, but I can't stress the importance enough of how important it is to fund education and to push people to be the best people that they can be.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes our question and answer period from the public. And boy, I got to tell you, thank you so much to the public. So many questions submitted. We weren't able to get to all of them, but that just shows the intrigue that people have and the necessity for events like this. So we're going to have closing comments from each of our legislators, and we're asking that you take about 2.5 minutes or so, or 2 minutes, to kind of wrap up today, and again, looking to the future of what you are working on. So we will start this time with Representative Heaton.
Okay, well, Ron Terrell, thank you. Yeah, and you have a beautiful smile, but if you wanted to, especially for borders, do timeout or do this, that might work as well. But, well, I tell you, there's going to be, again, a lot happening in the next few weeks. And so probably, hopefully, next week or next month, we'll have more information as far as the bills and so forth, that type of thing. But one thing I might add, I do have a bill that I'm working on, and Representative Jeff Thompson he represents, I think, the Danville, kind of on the northwest side of Indianapolis, and working with him on a public defender's bill in dealing with retirement funds for public defenders, and they've been kind of left out lately. And so again, being in a budget year, a long session, we'll hopefully can take a look at that. And but again, sometimes, you know, as I was told 10 years ago, it is a process. You just have to keep working and so forth. But I, you know, here we are again. Hard to believe, but we're going to see what the future holds with the upcoming session and the funding, and take it from there. But I appreciate the opportunity, and I know a lot of people's been doing Zoom meetings, but it's something that we just have to deal with, and hopefully we can get back to some normalcy in the months to come, and go from there. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with people today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Heaton. Let's go to Representative Path.
Thank you again for attending and for all the good questions from the chat room and Q&A. So, you know, I think we should be as transparent as possible. My mission myself is to learn as much as possible about the budget, and, you know, question things. You know, if we give $600 million to education, is that a good use of our money? The existing programs, are they working? So I think it's very important for us as legislators to constantly question and say, you know, we're giving you this money. What are you doing with it, and is it working? So that's part of my own personal mission. But I also just wanted to let people know that, you know, you can always contact my office. I think down there somewhere in the chat room is our information. So please reach out to any concerns you have, and I will try to get back to you. And thanks again for having us.
All right, thank you, Representative Path. Representative Borders.
It's, you know, like I said, the biggest thing I think that we're going to face this year is just to rebooting our economy. And again, I don't think it's going to be possible for us to do that as long as, not just the state of Indiana. I mean, we're more open than some, but we're not as open as we could be. You look at some of the states, and they're destroying their economies, and then they're going to want states that are fiscally sound like Indiana to basically bail them out. And another concern that I have, and Bob and I were talking about this earlier, I'm looking at, for example, just like some of the social media platforms, shutting down conservative voices, people that truly do believe that the Constitution is something that we should abide by. I think we may have to deal with that, quite frankly. I'd like to see some more platforms to develop to basically take on Twitter and Facebook and things like that are basically trying to shut out conservative voices, whether it be the President of the United States or whether it be somebody that disagree with a left-wing viewpoint. I think that we're in danger of losing our First Amendment rights. I think that's something that each state may have to deal with, and so I think that's a hugely important issue. I mean, and basically there is an attempt to shut out conservative viewpoints from many of our social media platforms, and I want people to be brave and to be strong and to realize that you know, the United States, in spite of the problems that it may have, truly is the greatest nation on earth, and the Lord has blessed us. And I do believe that in spite of mistakes that we may have made as a nation, we're the greatest nation on earth. And I really do believe that in order for this nation to survive and basically for Americans to continue to enjoy liberties and freedom, we are going to have to open up other opportunities for the conservative platforms to be spelled out.
Taking a cue from Representative Heaton, but thank you so much, Representative Borders. Appreciate it. And the last word for today will come from our Senator, Senator Ford.
Well, thank you. It's great that we had this forum, and appreciate everybody getting on. As has been stated, feel free to send me any questions you have. It is listed somewhere on here. Also, I have a survey that's live online at my site that, again, was listed here. Appreciate anyone filling that out. I'd like to make a plug. The state of Indiana is now vaccinating people over the age of 80. I would encourage anybody that knows someone in that age group or someone in that age group to go to rshot.in.gov or call the 211 number. It's, this is available free of charge, and we have 3 locations in the county where you can get the shots. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our legislators. Thank you to the Vigo County Public Library for hosting this event. Thank you to all of the sponsors. Again, that's League of Women Voters of Vigo County, the Will Center, Vigo County Teachers Association, Vigo County Taxpayers Association, and the Greater Terre Haute branch of the NAACP. And especially thank you for joining us. This is the best way that we can continue such an important event during this pandemic. This is not the end, though. We will see you for the next session that is scheduled for February the 13th. And again, that will be a virtual meeting again. One more time, I'm Rondrell Moore. It's been wonderful to moderate this event for you today, and we will see you next time. Have a good one.